July.
Okay. So I think we are live. Well, on behalf of Beacon House School System, the organizer of School of Tomorrow events, I'd like to welcome you to a world of tomorrow, negotiating a better future, the 11th edition of SOT events, and the first one that is fully virtual. Now, this non-profit SOT event series was launched by Beacon House in 2000 to help inform the direction of the organization while also engaging global communities in conversations shaping the future of schools and society. Before I introduce our very star guest here, let me introduce myself. My name is Munizae Jahangir. I'm moderating the session on behalf of the Beacon House School System. I'm a journalist and a current affairs show. I have a current affairs show on Arch TV called Spotlight, and I'm also the co-founder of voicepk.net, which is Pakistan's first digital media platform focusing on human rights issues. Now, let me introduce you to our very special guest, the legendary British film producer, Lord David Puttnam, who I'm a very, very big fan of, and he has many fans in Pakistan, I'm sure, who are film buffs. He right now presently is the chair of Atticus Education, an online education company that delivers audiovisual seminars to students all over the world. And in addition to this, he's a member of the House of Lords, as you can tell from his name, where he pursues an active role in a variety of areas from educational, environmental issues to digital skills. From 2002 to 2009, he was the president of the UNICEF United Kingdom, engaging with issues as diverse as water security and child trafficking. And in 2009, he was appointed to chair a special inquiry committee to investigate the impact of digital technologies on democracy. And we are going to be talking about that. But I think the work that he's known for in the mass media is that of an independent producer. He has won Academy Awards, Oscars for his films, The Mission, The Killing Fields, The Chariots of Fire, one of my favorite films, Midnight Express, Local Hero, and he has won around 10 Oscars, 13 Golden Globes, 9 Emmys, 31 BAFTAs, and the list goes on. So I want to inform your viewers that I'm not going to be just hogging this space, and you will also have an opportunity to ask Lord Puttnam your questions. So please do put up your questions. I will be putting it to him, and we will give you a good 10 to 12 minutes at least to ask your questions. But I'm having the first go because I'm the moderator. So thank you so much for joining us. And online, very welcome to Pakistan. Now, let me begin by your somewhat of an association with Pakistan, because as I said, that you were in charge of the chair of the Special Inquiry Committee to investigate the impact of digital technologies on democracy. And as Pakistanis, we have only flirted with democracy. So what has your experience been? And how can digital technologies impact democracy in a positive way, you feel?
Well, we started with 12 of people on the committee. It's an all-party committee, I should make that clear. And what was wonderful was when we reported a week ago, it was unanimous report. It's 153 pages long, so I wouldn't really recommend wading through it. But we started from the position of how could you use digital technology to underpin and support democracy as opposed to undermining it through misinformation. So we looked a lot at the impact of misinformation. We looked a lot at the fact that, for example, in the UK, very, very little has been done to help young people understand the implications of the information they receive digitally. In fact, it's been quite lamentable, the British exercise in that. They concentrated very much on trying to get computers into kids' hands. But the analogy I use is that's like giving kids bicycles, but not telling them how to about the highway code. So they come up to an intersection, they see 3 lights in front of them, red, green, amber, they don't know which means which. So we've actually got a lot of our priorities wrong in Britain. The young people certainly, and indeed older people, really need to understand the nature of the information they receive, where it's coming from, and what its biases may be. So in our final report, we're quite critical of the UK government. We're really very critical, I think, of Facebook because of the nature of the way its algorithms work and how damaging they can be. And we're slightly critical of Google. So I think it's an honest and fair report, all based on evidence. We didn't start with any preconceived ideas. This is all based on the evidence we received from, I think, well over 200 people and written submissions and oral submissions.
All right. Well, that's good to know, and I won't attempt to read the report, but certainly I'm sure there must be a news report out there. Let's go back to Chariots of Fire, one of the most amazing films that you have produced. Do you think that the message at that time is still relevant today, especially the post-COVID world?
Well, it needs to be. It badly needs to be. First of all, I must tell you, one of the reasons I did Chariots of Fire was, to an extent, I was reacting to Midnight Express. I was very proud. Midnight Express was my first big international hit, and it's a very well-made movie. But in a sense, it's a slightly clumsy film in that it steers the audience to a particular place. I think that we were insufficiently sensitive to the fact that it dealt in a different culture. And if I was starting it again, there are things that I think we put into the film that weren't there. But I was responding to the very binary reaction that movie got. And I wanted it, and I realized it really wasn't why I got into the film industry. I wanted to do something else. And I stumbled across this extraordinary story of this Scottish Presbyterian minister eventually, who, having trained and become a very, very fine athlete, refused to run in the 100 meters in the Olympic Games because they were running the heats on a Sunday. It seemed to me such an extraordinary thing to do that I wanted to know more about it. And the more I discovered about it and discovered who his compatriots were and the background to it, the more fascinating it became. And really the film, to be honest, was an act of defiance. First of all, in a world, maybe it should never have should have really been able to put the money together for it, but that was because of Midnight Express. And secondly, the success it achieved was out of all proportion from what we expected. We wanted to make a movie that was kind of an anti-movie, if you know what I mean, an anti-Superman movie, an anti-superhero movie. And in the end, we had this.
Why is that? Why did you want to make an anti-Superman movie?
Well, there's a long conversation. I have a real problem with superhero movies. And you're living through the truth of my reaction right now. Where are the Supermen? Where is the master invader coming down to solve COVID-19 for us? Who's cleaning up this mess? Who's making the really great decisions? The answer is there isn't anybody. In the end, the heroes are us. I don't mean me, but our nurses, our frontline staff, our care workers. They've been the superheroes. So I have to say, I rather despise the idea of this superhero. So is superhero a substitute for God, that we're hoping that God will intervene with a mask and a cape? So I always had problems, and as you said, I teach all over the world, and I get into this discussion always with my students. A lot of them are very fond of superhero movies, and I always say to them, just a minute. If there's any truth whatsoever, or in those movies you like, where are those guys now? Where's Batman? Where's Superman?
Well, in the sense with the COVID crisis, I think there have been super women for sure, right? Because you must have noticed that countries that are led by women have fared very much better with fighting the COVID pandemic.
Not only have I noticed, I'm doing a seminar week after next. I've actually already prepared my slide. I wish I could show it to you, which is images of 6 women in the world. It includes the Prime Minister of Iceland, the Prime Minister of Finland, Prime Minister of Denmark, Angela Merkel. All of them are there, and above them are Trump, Morrison of Australia, and saying the lamentable behaviour of these 3 men compared to the extraordinary, admirable behaviour of these 6 women tells its own story. So I've already got that slide prepared. Don't worry.
All right. Well, let's come back to filmmakers. Can filmmakers have a more positive role in, with this COVID-19 crisis? I know that there have been some series that have been done by filmmakers who have come together and said, this is a time that we have to produce films that are sympathetic to people. However, do you think more can be done by filmmakers in the post-COVID crisis, especially with lockdowns there? How can filmmakers become superheroes or try to be superheroes?
One thing we now know for sure, the quite incredible power of the image, whether it's captured on this or whether it's captured on elaborate equipment is extraordinary. If you just take the George Floyd issue, it's only because that woman had the courage to keep that video going right the way through that horrendous incident with the policeman that we even know about that. Otherwise, it would just be another fatality in another town on one of many, probably on that same day. Because she filmed that, and because there are no cuts, and you'll understand this, Munizae, that because there are no cuts in that, no one could doubt its authenticity. I promise you, had she had 2 or 3, cuts, we would be deluged with conspiracy theories about how the film had been manufactured and wasn't really true. The fact that the camera held steady, to their credit, the fact the police didn't actually stop her filming is quite remarkable. That's the power of film today. There's a wonderful film, I don't know if you've seen it, called For Sama, S-A-M-A, that was shot by a woman in underground hospital in Aleppo during the siege of Aleppo. It is so extraordinary. Again, a kind of film you could never have made. And when I look back to the Killing Fields,
documentary, or it's a fiction film?
It's a documentary, but it has such power. And if I look back to the Killing Fields, what we were trying to do in the Killing Fields was capture that form of truth. And in some ways, I think we did it. In some ways, I really do think we did it. But there were things we could never do in the Killing Fields because we couldn't wholly validate them, particularly some of the behavior of the Khmer Rouge towards children and adults. You couldn't go that far. In fact, when Hang Noor, who played the Cambodian, had been through the camps, and he used to say to me, "Oh, David, was much worse. And I'd say, "Look, Hank, with the best will in the world, we can't put worse on the screen or no one will come into the cinema." But now we're capturing things which are so compelling. I mean, I do recommend this movie for summer, or another movie called The Cave, again, shot in Syria, where we're now absolutely having to look at the reality. So I think, this began to happen. I'm sorry to keep answering this question in a rather long way, but it's very important. This began to happen during the Vietnam War, where the images coming back from Vietnam were so unheroic, so anti-heroic, if you like. That's what caused American students and basically the end of the war. We're now reaching a point where, unless you've got an authoritarian regime that's so sophisticated that it literally can stop people even using these, then they are in trouble, because they are sooner or later going to be confronted with truths which are so ghastly, which are screened all over the world, almost simultaneously by people like yourself, that they become inexplicable. So you end up with, frankly, authoritarian regimes which are so beyond the pale that the rest of the world struggles to deal with them.
I've seen your body of work, and it seems to me that it's inspired by your real-time experiences, because you're not just a producer of films. You wear so many different hats. You engage with society in so many capacities. You are part of politics. You have served in Cambodia. And I know that you went to Cambodia after you had made The Killing Fields, if I'm not wrong.
Many.
Yes. So many years later, have your experiences, your real-time experiences, actually inspire your films?
Yes and no. What was inspiring was my 7 years as president of UNICEF. That was a real wake up, because you go out to the field with UNICEF and you are confronted by quite remarkable people doing quite remarkable things in horrendous situations. In Serbia, I held a child who was, I think, 5-6 months old, little child, who'd been sold 3 times since her birth. I mean, because the child trafficking thing. So I got very involved with child trafficking in Asia, as well as in at that point the Balkans was particularly bad. Nigeria, terrible. So I've got to see things, and you have to balance out the awfulness that you see, but the heroism and commitment of the people who are trying to address it. And you'll be pleased to know, mostly women. I always remember in Serbia particularly, the entire legal team was women, and the doctors were women. So I'm a big fan of women. So that was one experience. Cambodia was very special, because I went back about 5 years after Pol Pot had gone, because when we made the movie, you got to remember, Pol Pot was still in control of Cambodia. I went back 5 years ago, and I went around the camps and I read the death camps. It was pretty horrendous. I was making a film for the BBC about the killing fields, and some of the stuff was hard. I mean, some of the stuff was so tough, I wouldn't even really want to begin to describe it this morning, because I sort of, and incidentally, on the documentary itself, I explained things that were so tough that I had to put the program out at 11 o'clock at night. So that gives you an idea that it was pretty rough. I made one. I then started to go back frequently because I was a UK trade envoy for Southeast Asia. So I went to Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia, and I used to go back a lot. I made one really bad mistake looking back. I was giving a speech, and the speech was interrupted by some young, very brave, really, human rights activists.
I read it.
Well, it was not a great moment. Now, I'd only just, I think it was my first or maybe my second visit. I had got to know some ministers. Maybe it was good casting on their part, but I got to know, I think, 3 ministers, including the Minister of Education, who I thought was excellent. So I started to defend the ministers that I'd met. So I trapped myself into appearing to be talking about a generality when I was actually talking about a specific. And I feel quite badly that in the end, I didn't fully listen to or appreciate what those young people were saying. And I still think about that occasion. I don't think I've done that often in my life. I do remember running the killing fields at a huge group of young people and watching them weeping in Phnom Penh. But every now and then, you get it wrong, because you do feel compelled. I think this is training from the House of Lords. Unless in the House of Lords you listen to the opposition, it's not like being in the House of Commons. Unless you actually listen to the opposition, you will get shot down in flames, because there's a lot of very expert people in the Lords. So you learn to listen. On that particular occasion, I didn't really listen enough.
So you're saying that people in the House of Commons don't really listen to the opposition?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid
All
not.
right.
It is extremely tribal, and I don't think a lot of listening takes place.
Well, Lord Puttnam, if you were to return to making films again, what would inspire you the most today to make a film on? What subject would you choose?
Easy. Climate change. We're waiting for at least one, hopefully great film on climate change, but there actually ought to be a great number of them. Climate change, let me explain. I've got a bit of history here. I had the privilege in 2008 of taking through Parliament the world's first climate change bill. It's still...
read about it.
I'm very, very proud of that. It's one of the most important things I ever did in my life. So I'm pretty obsessed by climate change. I think that what we're dealing with at the moment, COVID-19, is like a small dress rehearsal for what we will be coping with in climate change. And, with Pakistan and certainly nearby in Bangladesh, these are very, very fragile countries. And if I were going to bet where the catastrophe will be, the first of them, in the next 10 years, maybe less, will be probably flooding. I think it'll be in the Bengal Basin. I think you're going to be looking at levels of refugees that the world has never imagined. We know how difficult it was trying to deal with maybe 1 million refugees out of Syria. I think you are going to be looking at up to 5 to 15 million refugees. And what your part of the world decides to do about that is going to be fantastically important. Because unless we can find an accommodation and a way of dealing with that, then you're beginning to look at global wars. So this issue could not be more serious. And I say, honestly, COVID-19, we're coping as best we can. There are some terrible levels of death and misery, but compared with the implications of climate change by 2030, this is nothing.
So do you think that the world has appropriately responded to all these threats? Because we have seen in the last few years a rise of nationalism again, a rise of right-wing governments, a rise of nationalism. Are policy makers coming together and thinking beyond borders for a solution? And would you suggest that looking forward, looking ahead, that there perhaps needs to be a solution that brings the world together despite borders and in a way transcends borders?
I think that the importance of dialogue, number one, is vital. The importance of understanding what's possible and moving quickly is vital. Unfortunately, and this is the sad news, I think that there are an enormous number of people in power, both in the democracies and in the, as it were, faux democracies, and indeed in authoritarian regimes, who are really principally interested in themselves. It is quite amazing how many American, let's call it out, American and other billionaires who are looking for bolt holes for themselves, who anticipate exactly what I'm suggesting, but basically think as long as they and their families are okay, they really have no role to play. I was looking at an extremely good, it's on YouTube, you can see it, interview, 68, an interview with Marlon Brando, late Marlon Brando, who I knew. And he's talking immediately after the death of Martin Luther King. And he makes the point very passionately on an interview show that it's up to all of us. None of us can escape our responsibilities. It doesn't matter whether you are a headman in a small village in Pakistan, or a prime minister in the UK, or a senator, or a congressman in the United States. Every single one of us has a responsibility in this, because unless we act together, and unless we're completely conscious that either we all win or we all lose, we will lose.
You know, you've said this before, and I found one of your quotes to be very inspirational, because in India and Pakistan, we largely go to the cinema to escape our reality. You know, you see, now it started to change, but let's say that by and large, mainstream films are, you know, dance and show and all of that, and I really thoroughly enjoy them. But then the question needs to be also asked, that can cinema be responsible? And I know you have done a lot of socially conscious cinema, but you said something which really I thought was very interesting. You said democracy only exists because of our engagement with it. It's not a thing we have to engage with. You said that in context of messages that should be conveyed through audiovisual medium. Now, can filmmakers actually engage with democracy, and how can they do it better than they're doing it now?
Well, many do. First of all, let me say every single year, because I watch a lot of movies, every year throws up its 20 films that do engage, and some of them engage very, very well. The problem is they tend not to be seen by majority audiences for all the reasons you've just suggested, because cinema is still seen as an escapist medium. But I have my own philosophy is this. No one ever accused Killing Fields of being a boring film. No one ever accused Chariots of Fire of being a boring film. What they are is, I think, thoroughly engaging films. I don't always argue entertaining film, the mission. But the really important conversation happens as you walk out of the cinema. You've enjoyed your movie. You now go to a cafe across the road with your friends who you've seen the movie with. Do you start talking about your shopping the next day because the movie's over? Or does one of you say, you know what was really interesting about that movie was X or Y? When she said that, or when he replied that, didn't you think that was really interesting? So then you've got a conversation over a coffee or a meal even about what you've just been listening to or just been watching. That's the engagement element of cinema. And it's not a binary choice between showbiz and seriousness. The trick of a good movie is a combination of thoroughly good value for money, very engaging experience, and then afterwards, that made me think, because clearly what you're saying to me, you still somehow or other remember elements of Chariots of Fire. You remember that weird bit of self-sacrifice. You remember at the end that he won despite himself, he won. You know, that's what you remember. He did the right thing and was a winner. I'm looking for a world to do the right thing and win. That's all. That's what people like myself, and I'm sure people like yourself, are trying to, please. That's what I'm asking for from Facebook. That's what I'm asking for from the social media organizations. You have enormous power. Do the right thing.
Well, you know, now internet streaming is very, very new for you. I mean, you know, it just appeared in the last 2 decades. And one of the questions that the organizers wanted me to put to you is that will internet streaming services like Netflix and Amazon lead to the demise of cinema? Is that a big threat to cinema now? Especially to cinema goers, you know, the experience of cinema.
Well, it's a really great question, because it alters the cinema going experience. Now when I'm teaching, and I've done this for the last, I think, probably 3 years, I talk about screen sizes. I talk about the fact that more and more people are perfectly content with a good pair of earphones or iPads, iPods, to watch a movie like that. Now, you have to understand that from my point of view, as someone who made big movies, 70 mil even, that wasn't kind of thinkable. But for my students, that is where most of them are going to get their jobs. That's where most of the information they're going to come from. So they have to get used to it. And I've got a very nice clip I show of a whole range of cinema screen sizes. But the truth is, once we get, and I know this is kind of high end at the moment, but once we actually get VR up and running and use artificial intelligence well, that immersive experience could end up being more powerful than any movie I ever made was. Now, what's the difference? If I'm absolutely honest, one of the great attractions for me when I was 15, 16, 17 was getting in the background of the cinema and putting my arm around a girl in the dark. That experience maybe is gone. The holding hands, and you're not likely to hold hands with somebody who you're having having a virtual experience. So some elements will change, definitely. But the importance of the message, the importance of what you're saying, the importance of the experience, no, that's not going to go away. And that's all about imagination and storytelling. Do you have a great story to tell? Do you know how to tell that story? And can you engage? For me, cinema is about identity. Who am I? As that film unravels, man, woman, who am I in that story? Is it telling something that I can totally identify with? And am I going on a journey, which at the end of that journey, I'm going to think, wow, that was amazing. And I learned a lot.
So do you think that content is king? It doesn't matter whether it's on a small screen or a big screen. It's eventually the content that drives, or the script that drives the film.
No question. The experience is fungible. As I said, I regard myself, I could pinch myself with the luck that I made movies at a time when we had big cameras, big screens, big audiences. That was my luck.
And very political films. In some ways, they were very political films.
Some of them were. Yes, some of them were. I mean, the most political film I ever made, I'm sure you don't know, it's a film called Defence of the Realm. It was so political that I think the government in the UK were quite keen people didn't go to see it.
Very important question from the organizers. It's as a member of the House of Lords.
Sorry, I missed you broke up just then, Munizae. I've lost you for a moment. You've frozen.
Lord Puttnam, have we lost you, or are you still with us? Yes.
No, I can hear you. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. I lost you for a moment.
Okay, so well, the member of the House of Lords Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence, how can schools, they're asking, prepare their students for the world of intelligence AI, artificial intelligence?
Well, I think there's two answers to that. One is we need to help parents understand that the world of school, the world of learning, is a very different experience from the one that they had. So we've got to carry parents with us on this journey. I'm sure the people at Beacon House know this. So there's a remedial job to be done, in a way, on parents. In terms of young people, you've just got to look at where the opportunities are for ambitious, bright young people, and they're not where they used to be. 20 years ago, the ambition was to be in banking or to be in finance of some sort. The creative industries in the UK are by far the fastest growing industries in Britain. So I think the challenge with parents is tougher than with young people. Young people expose young people to a really interesting education where they engage with subjects in a slightly different way. That can be done, and then you're going to look at the whole assessment process. That's a different conversation. Assessment is a challenge for all of us, but I think the key is getting parents to say, you know what, there's no turning back now. COVID-19 and digital online learning has shown us that we've got to move forward. And the worst thing we could do is start thinking that somehow we could go back to some new normal. This is the new normal. There won't be a return to the way it was, and we should grab that and take advantage of it. And interestingly enough, a country like Pakistan can do that more easily, I think, than tradition-bound countries, traditionally education-bound countries like the UK. A very good friend of mine, Sir Michael Barber, spent several years in Pakistan working with the Department of Education, looking at the future. And immediately he came back to me and said, you know what's wonderful is we're already talking about mobile. No one in Pakistan is arguing that this is not a valuable tool. Whereas we were still in the UK in a situation where you mustn't take this into the classroom.
Well, it's interesting that you say this, because at a conference in Switzerland, I believe you also said that schools are behind the changes that have taken place already in the world, already in education, and they're not really keeping up with what is happening with the changing world. And you talked about skill set, and you said that they're not developing enough skill sets to create job opportunities for young people. How do you think schools can do this differently?
Well, I think there are two forms of skill set we're having a problem with. One is actually teachers. The need for professional development for teachers, the need to inject real confidence in teachers that this new world of learning offers many, many or more opportunities than threats to them. Now that, to an extent, is a facet of age. Very, very difficult for a 55-year-old teacher who's been doing pretty well the same curriculum maybe for 20 years or more to actually relearn. That's tough. But for any teacher, I would argue certainly below the age of 40, 45, yeah, you've got to devote time to instilling confidence and a new set of skills in terms of what they can offer their own students. Otherwise, you get this extraordinary thing. I remember something when I was working for the Department of Education, which I did in 97 until 2002. I used to go and tour around schools. And one of the most inspiring moments I ever saw was in a primary school, where a teacher looked at the class, and she had a whiteboard. And she said to one of these kids, who I think was about 7, Jimmy, come up here and help me. You're so much better at this than I am. And so the kid got up, and the kids explained, working on the whiteboard. Now, I then looked at the rest of the class. Magic. Because if little Jimmy could do it, why wouldn't they want to do it? So the teacher had the confidence to say, you know what, you're better at this than me. Now, bear in mind that the history, when you look back at your own life, the history of teachers was the most important thing was never to allow a kid to know anything about your subject more than you did. So
that's very true. Even in my time, and I'm sure now it's very different. The questions have started coming in, some extremely good questions. People are very eager to speak to you through me, and I will not hold them back. But I have to squeeze in a very small question for you, because you've been chairman of the 2 commission reports on the relationship between Parliament and public. And that's very interesting for us, because how can Parliament build a relationship with the public besides the usual duties that the Parliament has, is something that we would be interested in, because in our country, parliamentary democracy has really struggled. And I was wondering if we can learn from your experience of how Parliament can have a more robust relationship with the public while even in session.
Okay, the first of those reports was actually quite influential, because it came at exactly the same time as we had some real crises of trust with the UK Parliament. And my argument, coming from the outside world, if you like, was that Parliament was very, very bad at communicating with the public. It was a sort of master-servant relationship, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. It wasn't the way democracy was originally sold to people. And so the Parliament needs to be much, much better at communicating not just what it was doing, but how it was doing it. And some real work was done. But the thing that was caused the most trouble, will make you laugh, I hope, anyway. I did an organogram of the way that Parliament organised itself. And when you looked at it, it was ridiculous. I mean, basically, Parliament had managed to create a situation where no one really had responsibility for anybody else. It was chaos. So then alongside it, I did a kind of normal McKinsey-like, if you like, organogram that involved a chief executive. And when you looked at these two things, it was obvious. I got a wave of loathing from parliamentarians who liked this impenetrable system because they weren't accountable. They would always argue, you don't blame me. I do that with him, and I turn. So what it was a kind of almost deliberate obfuscation is the best word of accountability. And what we did was we penetrated that and said, not only are you accountable, but you need to communicate the manner in which you're accountable, because then people can hold you accountable. So that was quite a stir.
In a very different world, in a very different context, this would be music to so many people's ears who are very against parliamentary or democracy in Pakistan completely. But moving forward to some of the questions that are coming in. One of the first questions is, would you consider producing Chariots of Fire Part 2 or a remake of the old film, as we're seeing a lot with other movies, with other old movies?
No, Someone did make a film. I don't think it'd be a very good film because I don't think it ever got released, about Eric Liddell after the film, his life as a missionary. I think it was a very well-meaning film, but it didn't go in. No, I once, when I was doing rock and roll films, I was a very, very young man. I did a sequel because the film was so successful and the character was so compelling, and the film was kind of left him in the air. So I did a film called That'll Be the Day and a film called Stardust. That was well before you were born, I promise you. 72 and 73. But I've always resisted doing sequels. You're on a hiding to nothing, really. I did a movie years and years ago called Bugsy Malone, and they were desperate for us to do sequels to Bugsy Malone. It was a big hit. But the idea of assembling a cast, everyone in the cast was 12 years old. By the time the film was finished, they were 13. By the time we could have done it, they were 14. The idea of going back was like a nightmare.
That's a definitive no. The other question is, please consider, it's a request for another film. Please consider producing a film on the life of the late Pakistani human rights fighter, Asma Jahangir, who actually, I think somebody saw me interviewing you and also put that question in. She was my mother, and she was a human rights lawyer in Pakistan. I think that's a question. I think that's more of a request. So anyway. It's an interesting thing. When my friend, one of my 2 or 3 best friends in the world, who's died now, Richard Attenborough, did Gandhi, there was enormous resistance in India to this Englishman doing Gandhi. When another really close friend of mine, Roland Joffe, who did The Mission, came over and did Midnight's Children, again, he encountered enormous opposition. Far from people being grateful, there was a feeling of, well, what does he know? How can he express our feelings? So I'd be very, very nervous. I think that films about these characters are really important, really, really important. Richard Attenborough again did a film about South Africa and encountered problems there. So I think you have to be very, very careful dealing with that. I once did think very long and hard about doing a film about a Canadian called Edgar Snow, who was on the Long March with Mao Zedong and who is regarded in China as an extraordinary man. But I felt more comfortable with that because he was a Canadian doctor. And at least I could have kind of got inside his head as to what he put himself through and why. But I wouldn't dreamt of doing the same thing about Chou En-lai or no. So I think, when the tough moments happen on a movie, and they happen, so either during script stage or production stage, you are forced back on the issue of what would I do? You do involve yourself, you do engage. What's my instinct here? How am I going to respond to this? Very hard at that point to get into the head of someone whose culture is different from yours, whose background is different from yours, whose experience is different from yours. I'd think twice. Can I give you an illustration of why I'm very nervous at things like this? When we finished Midnight Express, we thought a lot about how to move the character Billy Hayes from being in prison to into a lunatic asylum, a madhouse. What would he do to justify that cut? And we had this extraordinary scene where he fought this really vile guy. And in the end of the scene, he literally bit the guy's tongue out. I mean, it was a horrible scene. We had a lot of arguments about how to do it, but he did it. And then you kind of did that, looked up, and he was in the mental home. We previewed the film, the premiere of the film in New York, in a big cinema in New York. I went to see it. And as this moment happened, instead of the audience going, they got up and they cheered. They were so identified with this kid and so hated the villain, they cheered. And I realized that actually, as a filmmaker, you've got to be very, very, very careful with the way you interpret emotions. You have to be careful. But I think that you have explored a lot, and perhaps that's what people want you to see you do. Well, the other question is, students learn more through documentaries, especially when they make their own. Do you think it should be part of their curriculum, especially in countries like Pakistan?
Yes, and I had a very good experience of that. I was chair of a thing called Nesta, an organization called Nesta, which was a very well-funded think tank by the government. And I was able to make a deal with a Canon camera company who gave us quite a lot, I think about 100 small cameras. And I had a very good relationship with the then education minister in Northern Ireland. So we went to Belfast and we experimented. I think we took about 4 schools, 13-year-old children. And we also digitized the Northern Ireland Film Archive. And we got the young people to go home with these cameras and interview their grandparents about their lives, their experiences in Belfast, particularly the experiences of troubles. But the rule was they then had to use 30% of old documentary, of library footage. And then they had to put them, and bring them back and show them to their class. And what happened was kids, first of all, literally had conversations with their grandparents they would never have had, then had to look at the way their grandparents' worlds and realize how different it already was from their own. And that, I think, had quite an interesting healing process for them. They realized that the old enemies, the old conditions, the old experiences of their grandparents weren't theirs. So why would they replicate them in terms of the old hatreds? So my answer to the question is a big yes.
All right. Well, that would be great if, and we already have, by the way, we have a lot of citizenship journalism happening in Pakistan because we have a lot of censorship. So students are very active, and we've had a huge student protest in Pakistan recently, which is quite exhilarating to see in some ways, students coming out for their rights. Well, the next question is, you said, they're quoting you, countries led by women have done better on the COVID-19. Shouldn't socially conscious cinema encourage more leadership for women globally? Meaning, perhaps they want you to make a film on a woman leader.
Yes. Again, the answer is absolutely yes. You have to be very careful that you don't get trapped in some form of ambiguity. For example, there have been films about Benazir Bhutto. And I have no idea what the reaction in Pakistan is to those films. I really don't know. I know that, fun enough, I know a lot of people who were at Oxford with her, who adored her. So the only reflection I have personally of her is someone who people around her liked very, very much indeed. But let's say if you did a film about Aung Suu Lee, which film are you going to make? Are you going to make a film about this woman who revered her father, but in a sense was trapped in her father's own prejudices? And some of the things that have happened in certainly the last few years are really quite questionable. Or would you make a film about a woman who was tremendously courageous in dealing with the generals who were running Miramar for so many years? These are very sensitive subjects, but the general answer to your question is absolutely yes. I mean, I'm fascinated at the moment by Jacinda Ardern. What is it?
We are all fascinated by her.
Well, I am, because there's something about her personality which is so engaging that she manages to communicate in a way that not very many other politicians around the world have ever managed to. She has a spontaneity to her and a vulnerability, and whether that vulnerability will eventually result in failure for her, I don't know, but she's a breath of fresh air.
Well, we have another question, but I think this is from somebody who's quite taken in by all your films, and they're saying, who is the most famous actor you've ever met or worked with? And I'm going to add another one. Can you tell us any anecdotes about them?
The most famous actor I mentioned earlier that I ever met, without doubt, I think was Marlon Brando, certainly the most fascinating. And I spent I didn't work with him, unfortunately. I wish I had. No, but I got to know him in a sense of an activism. I got to know the activism bit of him, and I was a big admirer of his. He was a rather extraordinary man. In terms of who I've worked with some wonderful actors and actresses. Helen Mirren, the most prepared actress I've ever worked with. Very, very nice woman. Vanessa Redgrave, again, brilliantly professional. Robert De Niro, Jeremy Irons, Dustin Hoffman. I have had good and less good experiences, to be honest. The weirdest anecdote, I suppose, is because it's in his biography, no secret here, is me trying to persuade Robert De Niro not to be in The Mission. Because the part had been written for a much younger man, and the studio were very keen to get Robert, and he was wonderful in the film. I've got to admit that probably maybe I was wrong, but I'd already cast the part in I got another actor. And if you look carefully at The Mission, you'll see there's a guy walking around a lot in the background, has a much smaller part, who is the person I'd already cast. His name happens to be Liam Neeson. So I wasn't a bad judge of who would have been a good in the film. But yeah, trying to persuade Robert De Niro not to be in the movie. And he said to me, No one's ever said that to me before. I said, well, I'm really sorry. I'm telling you the truth, because if we're going to work together, we might as well trust each other.
Okay, so we have just maybe 30 seconds left, and I'm going to squeeze in another one, is whether you have a message for our young producers and directors, aspiring directors, somebody like me even perhaps.
So you have to believe in yourself. You have to ask yourself, what is it I have to say that no one else in the world could possibly say? Because a combination of my experiences, my attitude to life, what I've been through, what I believe, what I desperately care about, is I'm the only person in the world that knows that. Therefore, I have to make my movie, because if my movie will actually change everybody's attitude to Pakistan, or maybe everyone's attitude to themselves.
Any plans of coming to Pakistan physically after we are done with the COVID-19 crisis and out of the lockdowns?
I'm always fascinated to visit country. I really am. I'd love to visit Pakistan. I'd love to visit Bangladesh. I've visited almost everywhere in India. So yes, it's about time I visited Pakistan. You're quite right.
Well, we will be here welcoming you in person, and it was really nice having you and meeting you online. I hope I'll have an opportunity to meet you in person very soon. And thank you so much for joining us in the School of Tomorrow. And thank you everybody for watching this special session. You can give us your feedback, and we would also like to thank the lead sponsors, UBL. And I would also like to make a small announcement that Lord Puttnam will be on another session tomorrow, so you can tune into that. Well, thank you for watching, and thank you, Lord Puttnam, for joining us.
Thank you. Very enjoyable. Thank you.